Hello and welcome to another edition of Turbo Delphi Demos. I'm Nick Hodges, the Delphi Product Manager, and today we're going to continue on building our TurboPad application, which is a Notepad clone. And today we're going to fix a little problem with the application. If you guys have been paying close attention, you probably have noticed that the application isn't really careful with your data. For instance, if we run the application here, I type in some important text, like so, and then I just exit the application. You notice, it just totally doesn't pay any attention to the fact that you just wrote some important text that you might want to save. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to add some functionality that will protect that data and manage that data. And of course, yesterday we created this text file name object to sort of manage this, and we added this isDirty tag, but we didn't really use it that much. And so today we're going to work a little bit with the ttext file name object and enhance it so that it is smart enough to know that the file needs to be saved, and will ask you if you want to save it, and then keep track of that information for you, so that any application that uses this ttext file name can check to see if the application, if the file needs to be saved, and then will allow you to save it if indeed that is the case, and if you want to. So what we're going to do then is we're going to add a property here we're going to add a function. We're going to have a function called shouldSave, and that function is going to return a Boolean value. And this function will be called if you want to know whether the file should be saved or not. And in fact, that's what we're going to do, is we're going to ask the user, should we save this file? So like in our previous example, when I type some text into the computer, into TurboPad, and then close the application, I can ask should save. We call the should save function and ask the user, should we save this? If the user says yes, then we'll save it. If they say no, then we won't. That'll also come in it'll also factor in the isDirty function or property, because what happens is we will only ask the user if the function is dirty, right? If the text is dirty, excuse me. So let's hit Control-Shift-C, and that'll give us a little template here for the should save function. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit F. I'm going to stop the tape here. I'm going to type in a bunch of code, and then I'll come back. Okay, I'm back, and now I've written a bunch of code for the should save function. And basically what I do here is, first of all, I set the result value to false. We assume that we're not going to save. Now, if the file is dirty, then we're going to do a bunch of stuff. And if it's not dirty, we're not going to do anything. If the file is not dirty, then there's no reason to save, and therefore we're not going to even bother the user with a question. However, if it is dirty, then we want to check, do they want to save the function? And I'm going to actually pin back some of these items here so we can concentrate a little bit more on our code. The first thing I do is I construct a prompt. I say the file, what's the file name, and I put double quotes around it, has been changed. Do you want to save? So that's a yes or no question. So then I pop up a message dialog box here. We're passing in the temp prompt a confirmation icon, and I put up 3 buttons: yes, no, and cancel. And then this last number refers to a help context number that we don't have, since we don't have any help for our application yet. And I end up getting an answer. Message dialog returns an integer, and the integer is usually in a form of one of these variables values here. MB no, you'll see, is worth 1, and MB yes is worth 2. And thus, when we call should save, the prompt comes up, and the user can press one of the 3 buttons. If they say no, then we go ahead and set isDirty to false, meaning that they don't care about what they've typed, and we're going to end up somehow cleaning out the file either by opening a new file or by creating a new file. And so isDirty becomes false. Otherwise, the answer comes back from this should save. It will be true if temp answer is yes, and it will be false if it's anything else. Oh, and okay, I noticed that I've made a little mistake here, actually. The message dialog doesn't return the MB variables, it returns MR values. By the way, the message dialog box is in the dialogues unit, and these MR return result values are in the controls unit. Hence, I've added them to the uses clause of my implementation section. Okay, so now that we have this should save, we can go back over to our main form, to our code here, and then we can go ahead and change the way we deal with opening and creating new files. So for instance, when we create a new file, instead of clearing things, we go if f file name dot should save, then and only then will we go ahead and actually clear out the memo. Okay, and of course, if we should save, then we actually have to, really no kidding, save the file. Now, save the file is an undeclared identifier, so I'm going to go ahead and declare it. I'm going to go ahead and declare now a procedure called on tmain form called save the file. And this is going to be the place where we do all the work of saving the file. We decide, in this case, we'll decide if the file's been saved or not. If it has been saved, we'll go ahead and just flat out save it. If it hasn't been saved yet, and we're going to go ahead and save it, we will grab a hold, ask if it needs to be saved in the file save as method. Or, I'm sorry, we will bring up a file save as dialog box and ask the user for the file name that they want to save it and the directory and all that. Now I'll go ahead and hit Control-Shift-C, and that will declare the save the file procedure up in the interface section. So now, of course, saving the file is going to be a little more complicated than just simply saving it. We have to determine if the file has been saved before, and then we have to act accordingly. Okay, so we have to come up with a way to determine if the file name has been saved or not. And where else would we do that except in, of course, our file named object. Now, one of the ways we can do this, and probably the easiest way, is to simply check the file name itself, and if it's blank, then it hasn't been saved, and if it's something other than blank, then it has been saved. And that requires us to do a little changing of what we've done before. Now, we've got this get file name function here, as well as the set file name function, and the initialize. And you notice that we've actually stored the untitled.txt in the f file name. Well, what we're going to do is change that logic a little bit so that the f file name never gets untitled.txt. It simply gets the value of a real file, and if it doesn't have a value of a real file, it's going to stay blank. And we can alter the logic here a little bit. First of all, when we initialize the object, we'll go ahead and initialize f file name to be a blank string. Next, we'll never set the value of f file name to untitled. We'll go ahead and set, in this case, when we get the file name, if f file name, the field itself is blank, then we'll just return as a result untitled.txt, or otherwise we will return the value of the file name itself, which in this case would be a valid file name, like so. And the same thing as when we set it. When we set the file name, if the value is equal, well, actually, when we set the file name, we'll just go ahead and set it to whatever the value that is passed in. If it's blank, great. If not, then it's a valid value. And now, as you can see, we could add a property here, a read-only property called has been saved of type Boolean, and it's going to be a read-only. So the value we're going to get is get has been saved. Now, once again, hit Control-Shift-C to invoke class completion here, which will give me a stub called get has been saved, and the result is going to be the length. Well, actually, we can just say f file name doesn't equal empty string. So that will return true if the file has a value other than blank string. Okay, so now we can go back over to our main form, into our save the file method, and we can check now to see if the file's been saved. So we want to take two different actions. One of two different possibilities, excuse me. First is the file has been saved before, so we just go ahead and save it. Secondly, the file hasn't been saved before. It doesn't have a file name, so we have to call the file save as dialog, and then go ahead and save the file based upon that. So we can do our if f file. We can now call if f file name dot has been saved. Then we'll do one thing, and in the else clause, i.e., if the file has not been saved, then we'll do another. Now, if the file has been saved, then we will simply go ahead and save it, given the file name that we've been keeping all along. And of course, memo1 lines property, the collection of lines inside the memo, has a save to file method, and we will simply call f file name dot file name on that. Now if it hasn't been saved, then we need to invoke the save as functionality. And the way we can do that is by calling the trusty file save as action. We can call its execute method, and that will return true if the user presses the OK button, and if not, then we don't want to do anything. If they hit the cancel button, or they don't hit the OK button, or they close the dialog box without hitting the OK button, then we just don't want to do anything. We don't want to save or anything like that. Nothing happens. So but if they do hit the OK button, we need to do a couple things. First, we need to grab the file name from the dialog box itself. There's the dialog, and then of course it has a file name property that will include the file name, and then we need to do the same thing we did above. memo1.lines.save to file, f file name dot file name, like so. So there's two different ways that the file can be saved. If it already has been saved, or if the user goes ahead and gives it a name, and then we can grab that information, stick it in the file name. Now, of course, at this point, too, if either one of those things occur, the fFileName.isDirty flag needs to be set to false because we've saved everything, and therefore the I'm going to drag and drop this up here like so. The file name is dirty property needs to get set to false because once the file is saved, then the file is no longer dirty. Okay, now as just a little side note, I'm going to do what's called a refactoring on our code. Now refactoring is rewriting working code so that it's laid out better and it's better organized and it's more efficient to read. Actually, it doesn't necessarily get more efficient to execute, but it's certainly more efficient to read and manage. And the one refactoring I'm going to do is called extract method. Now you'll notice that these two lines here and these two lines here are the same exact lines of code. It doesn't make sense to repeat them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to extract them out. I'm going to create a method that will do the same exact thing as those two lines of code, and then I can replace these two similar chunks of code with that one method call. So here we go. I'm going to highlight them. I'm going to right click and I'm going to select refactoring called extract method. That brings up a dialog box that asks me what I want to name the method, and I want to name this method write the file. And this will actually be the function that does the work of writing out the file, and then of course subsequently setting the isDirty flag. So once I give the new method name, I click OK, and you'll notice that the IDE has now created for me a new function called write the file, and in fact it's even declared it up here for me in the interface section. And now I've got a function called write the file, and I can take these two lines of code and replace it with write the file as well. And now I have code that's a little better organized. I've got nice, tight, small functions and methods, and each method does one precise thing, and I don't have any repetitive code as well. There's one other little thing I want to do too, is since we changed the functionality of the value of what it gets stored in fFile name, you'll notice down here in should save, I've actually tapped the internal field, which could be blank. And I don't want it to be blank. I want it to return the value untitled if the file name is indeed blank. So now, if I hit Control S to save and I run, you'll notice that I typed some code in here. This is really important. And now if I go File New, you'll notice it says the file name untitled text has been changed. Do you want to save? And I say yes. And now I get a save as dialog. I can save it as a file name index.html, and then now I can open up index.html again like so, and you'll notice that it brings that information back. Now I've got another little bug up here in the new action. You'll notice that right now the only time the memo gets cleared is if you should save. Well, it should get cleared no matter what, whether they save or not. So I need to move the memo clear and the fFile name clear portion out of the save the file function. However, if they hit cancel, we don't want the memo cleared. If they hit cancel when the file save as box comes up, they hit cancel. Everything should stop, and they should not clear the file. We shouldn't clear the file. We shouldn't do anything. We shouldn't create a new file. We shouldn't do anything. And so what needs to happen there is save the file actually needs to tell us whether we should be doing that or not. So I'm going to change save the file to a function that returns, we'll just call it a Boolean. It'll return true if the file was saved and false if nothing happened. So we'll have to go up here and change this to a function, and we'll put this as a Boolean as well. And now we'll go down to the function. I hit, by the way, Control Shift down arrow and up arrow, which goes between the two, the interface declaration and the implementation declaration. So now this thing has to have a result. And we're going to assume right off the bat that nothing happened, that they didn't save the file. But if they did save the file, if they did actually write out the file, then we'll return result gets true. If they did write the file here, of course, we'll also say result gets true. So if the file was actually written, for whatever reason, then we will write the file. However, if the file name here again, if they bring up file save as execute and they hit anything other than the OK button, the result will end up being false. So now, if there's no reason to save, we can say if they should save, then save the file. And then we can say, well, if save the file, then begin end. And we can copy this code here. Can copy it. I hit Control C there to do that. And then we can also say, well, if they aren't supposed to save the file, if should save is false, then we also, and again, want to clear out the memo. And then now we have the code that will properly deal with the situation where they hit cancel on the should save button when we're trying to create a new file. This all gets very tricky because there is kind of a lot of convoluted Boolean logic that can take place when the user decides to not rename the file. Basically what happens is we want to make sure again, this is all happening again because we don't want to delete existing important text. Okay, now there's actually another little quirk here, and that is that this function here, file save as one.execute, doesn't return false when you hit the cancel button. I was just offline, if I must admit, testing it a little bit. It doesn't return false for reasons I'm not entirely clear about, but I don't want to dig into it too far right now. So instead, we're going to hack it a little bit. What we're going to do now is we're going to create a variable called temp file name, which is a type string. And then we're just going to simply call file save as execute. We'll just call it without worrying about its return. And then from that point, we're going to get temp file name is going to get whatever the file name that comes back from the file save as dialog. And then that is going to be blank if the user presses the cancel button. So if temp file name is not blank, then we'll go ahead and do the rest of this stuff. Otherwise, we won't. We will then, in turn, set the internal file name to whatever the temp file name turned out to be and go on and do everything else. Otherwise, we'll just leave it, and we'll always have our results set to false. Okay, now I can't resist. The pragmatic programmer in me wants to refactor this. So notice I've got memo1.clear, fFileName clear, memo1.clear, fFileName clear here twice. So I'm going to highlight this, right-click, select the extract method refactor, and I'm going to name this just called clear memo. And now I will have a file name clear, or the method name clear memo, and I can use it twice here. Memo, and I can control click on this, and it'll take me to the declaration of clear memo, and you see that it clears the memo and it clears the file name as well. So now whenever I open a file, execute a new action, I've got a nice, neat, well refactored method here. If I should save, then I check to see if the file was indeed saved, and if it was indeed saved, clear the memo. Otherwise, if they don't save, then just go ahead and, if there's no need to save, then go ahead and clear the memo anyway. Okay, now here's an interesting little side bit too, is that since we have this save the file function, we really actually no longer need this file save as event handler as it's written here. Because once this event is fired, that means the file save as dialog has been pressed, so we have to change it slightly. We still will go ahead and grab the file name from the dialog box itself, which is the dialog property and then the file name property of the dialog there. But then basically we want to do a modified save here, right? We want to make sure now that we know that this file save as button has been accepted, the OK button has been pressed. So the f file name dot is dirty function is going to be false. It's not dirty anymore. And then we want to go ahead and just save the memo out. The lines property dot save to file using the f file name property. It's a little different than what we had there, but I just basically added this line of code here to make sure that the file was not dirty anymore after the file save as was run. Okay, I'll save, and then there's one more little thing I need to do for this code, and that is I need to make sure that whenever the text changes in the memo, the isDirty property of the file name class gets set to true. And the way I do that, of course, is by going to the memo itself. And the memo has an onChange event attached to it, and that is fired anytime anything inside the memo is changed. So if I double-click to create an event handler for it, I can then come in and put in the code that will set the file name property isDirty property of the file name class to true. So every time now the memo changes, the isDirty will be set to true, and then all of the subsequent logic will be handled. And now we can run this application, and we should have a fully functioning Notepad clone, at least with regard to how it handles files. So we have a new file here. I can type some data in, I can save it, and it knows that I haven't saved it yet, so it asks me for the save as, and I save it as the junk file. I can add some more files here, and I can go save, and it'll save it. Or I could go save as, and it'll ask me to save it again, and I'll save it as some other file. And then I can go, type in some more, make changes, whatever. And I can go file new, and it'll ask me, do you want to save or not? And I can say yes, and it saves before I create a new file, because it already had saved it, knew the file name. Now, so that should wrap it up for today, this edition of Delphi Turbo Demos. Thanks for your attention. In the next edition, we will start adding more enhancements, like an edit menu to our Turbo Notepad clone. Thanks for listening. I'm Nick Hodges, Delphi Product Manager. Take care.